Welcome, I'm Michael Bickert. Thanks for joining me today as we explore concepts with the objective of improving your management skills and growing your business. I hope you have your notepads and your pens handy because I want you to take notes. I want you to make a commitment to yourself that you will jot down some sort of action item that you can implement in your business today, because that's what this is all about. Implementation to drive your business forward. Now, we're going to continue our discussion about waste, Muda. And this is part of a playlist, so if you haven't seen the others, they're not in any particular order, but if you haven't seen our first two videos from long ago in which we discuss what Muda is, more generally speaking, the 7th and 8th form of waste as defined in the Toyota production system, I'd recommend perhaps you explore those, but it's not entirely necessary. You might pick up on the concept just through the context of this video. Today we're going to be discussing inventory, the waste of inventory, and as with all the other discussions in this playlist, I will be providing you some downloadable notes for free. You can just go into the description and click on the link. It'll ask you for your name and email address, and we'll send you out a PDF. You'll be able to get everything that I'm going to show on the screen. So those aren't the notes that I need you to take. Instead, I want you, as always, to frame our discussion through the lens of your business, your day-to-day experience, and apply this information and this knowledge in a way that it can actually affect change and improvement and innovation in your business. So as I address the various audience members, the managers, entrepreneurs, aspiring managers from a variety of industries, I will try to use examples that maybe will resonate with all of you, and I'll tell a couple of stories from my history, my observations, and maybe an anecdote or two. But I want you to think about what is most relevant to you in your business. That's what this is about, right? And so make some notes on that, and then try to implement something in your business that you can change today. So I'm going to bring up on the screen, and we're going to construct today's discussion in 4 parts. First, we'll look at the categories of inventory, and then we'll look at why it's wasteful, and then the causes of it being wasteful, and then we'll look at, can we actually add value through inventory even though it is considered a form of waste. So let me bring up the notes on the screen and we'll start there. All right, here we go. Inventory categories. This is really pretty simple and something that you can understand. Really, I like to think of inventory as things that require storage in some way. And so the categories would be the raw materials. So perhaps you build something, you make something, you produce a product, and you are bringing in raw materials from various suppliers and vendors, maybe some sort of commodity that you use to create your product. And do you have to store those somewhere? So raw materials can be in inventory. Another category would be work in progress. So those components midway through your production. So you start off and you're making something, but because of your logistics, your production method, you may have to put some things aside and inventory them, these components of work in progress, until you get to the next phase of production. There's some waiting in between the flow of your workflow, your progress. And so anytime there is that delay, and we talked about that's waiting, but that waiting causes an inventory. You have a buildup of product components midway through. That work in progress is also a category. Another one is finished products, of course. So when you've finished making your product, then does it immediately get consumed by your end consumer? Almost assuredly not. Remember, we understand that theoretically there is going to be Muda, there's going to be waste inherent in all processes and all production methods. Doesn't matter about your product, doesn't matter what your service is, there's always going to be. And what we're trying to do is explore ways to reduce it as much as possible so that you can be more efficient, more streamlined, and you will have a better value equation for your customers. So when you finish building your product or service, in this case, I guess your products, you finish making your products, they have to be stored somewhere. They are inventory in some way before they get to your end consumers. So those are the categories. I've got another one here that I think of, and that is dormant or underutilized resources. So think of the various resources you have, and are they always involved in production, or sometimes are they underutilized? Sometimes are they dormant? So labor, do you have people? I think of your people as wasteful inventory insofar as they're not being used to their fullest potential. And so think about when you have, you're at full staff and it's a slow day. Maybe you're in retail and you've got a sales team on the floor and you've got people in the back that are warehousing and stocking shelves, whatever it may be, people that are running the logistics, and it's a very slow day. You don't have any demands created by the market, or the demands are far less than your capacities are capable of, and so your labor is somewhat dormant. So that's an inventory. Also your equipment and tools. If you're not using your equipment or tools to their fullest potential, they are lying dormant or underutilized. I would consider those inventory. That is tied up capital. Also your facility. So sometimes you are not using your facility as wisely as you can be, as efficiently as you can be, and therefore it's underutilized and it may have space that's dormant, and I consider that inventory as well. Creative assets, I've got a whole video on that. You should check out that, on how you may spend some time, invest some time, you invest resources in creating some content, some sort of creative asset, and then you're failing to repurpose it, and so it's underutilized, and it's an inventory that's sitting there, and you have a capital investment in there, but you're not getting the maximum resource or return on your investment out of that resource. Uninvested financial capital as well. So maybe you have excellent cash flow and you have actually an excess amount of capital that's sitting there, and it's not being invested in a way that can actually get a good return on the investment. So it's dormant in a sense, and therefore that's very wasteful as well. All right, now let's look at why inventory is wasteful. The first thing is, think of it this way: it consumes, it does not leverage resources. And you want to always be leveraging your resources to the greatest degree possible. Anytime that you are consuming resources, then that's necessary. We want to consume resources to drive production, but if we're not leveraging them to the fullest extent, then it's wasteful. Remember, we understand that inventory may be a necessary form of waste. We're trying to look at when is it more wasteful and how can we reduce the waste. So think of it in terms of the consumption of a resource and not leveraging it to the greatest degree. And so here's some examples here. Your facility and your space. So if we're talking about storage, right? When you have raw materials coming in, it is consuming space in your facility. If you didn't have as much inventory, if you ran on a more just-in-time inventory methodology, you wouldn't need as great of a facility, as large a footprint of a facility, and you maybe be able to drive down your rent factor, and that could control your expenses better, and that could end up in the value of your product through the pricing equation. Another one would be financial capital. Okay, so obviously when you buy, as an example of one of those categories, raw materials, then they're sitting there and they're not in the production cycle yet. They are tying up your financial capital. They're not actually, because it's not being produced and it's not being sold, those raw materials are actually tying up financial capital. So another reason that inventory is wasteful is it devalues due to its susceptibility to the following things: depreciation, and again, and a great example of that would be hardware. So we talked about equipment and tools that are dormant or underutilized. Anytime you have an inventory, we can all understand that hardware is, one of the highest depreciating assets you may have. And so anytime you have an inventory that depreciates, that's very wasteful. It can deteriorate. Another example would be batteries. So there's all sorts of types of inventories that as they sit, they deteriorate. Another one is spoilage, and the greatest example you can think of is food. For those of you who are in any of the supply chain or the retail of food, so you might be in grocery, you might be in convenience store or retail, you might be in farming, agriculture, ranching, or you might be in restaurant and hospitality. We all know that food has a shelf life and it's only good for so long before it begins to spoil. So when we inventory food, we risk it can be wasteful due to spoilage. Damage. Think about when things are in inventory, we've damaged them. And we used to think of inventory maintenance as a necessary expense every month. Is that when you have inventory, you have to maintain it in some way. It either deteriorates or it can be damaged, and you may need to repair your inventory. And that just really is a terrible situation. So you've got, let's say, a finished product ready to move to a consumer, and then something happens like a spill or a scratch or a dent, or you crush it. In the storage of it, it's damaged in some way, and therefore that costs you money. It's very wasteful. Shrinkage or theft. So shrinkage is just another word for like your staff stealing from you. When you have inventory that is being stored, it is at risk to being stolen internally or externally. And I understand that you might trust your people. That should be a prerequisite of somebody working for you. Those of you with larger businesses understand that where there is an opportunity for someone to steal, the temptation is often too great, and it's a reality. So those businesses that have or warehouse a lot of inventory definitely have on their financial statements, on their income statements, a place for shrinkage, because they are losing part of their inventory to theft, internal theft. And then of course there's shoplifting and things like that for those of you who have retail. And maybe there's break-ins. Somebody comes in the middle of the night and steals your inventory. Maybe you have some parts out in a yard, construction materials, and you have to pay for security there. You might, and so you can understand the cost of having inventory due to the security that you need and the potential for theft. Obsolescence is a big one. So when inventory sits around for long enough, it can be replaced by innovation. So you've all experienced that in some way, where something, either in your personal life or in your business, you had something, maybe it sat in its packaging, and then eventually there was a newer version out and the other one was obsolete. It no longer worked, or it was, nobody wants that one anymore. Think in your personal life, gaming consoles and various types of technology for playback of entertainment media, all of those things have become obsolete. Well, businesses have the same exact issue, that inventory sits around, it can become obsolete, where there's a newer version of it that comes out and nobody wants the old one. And so managing your inventory well means that you are making sure that it has we understand it has a shelf life. Even if it doesn't spoil like food, you want to think of it as always having a shelf life and getting it out to avoid obsolescence. Being lost or misplaced is another one. We can all think of something that we set aside, we maybe purchased it, we acquired it prior to our immediate need, and then we set it on a shelf or we put it in a drawer somewhere. We inventoried that item, and then when we did need it, it was like, where is it? And now that's wasteful. Now there's all this motion and there's waiting going on, and just another example of how inventory can be wasteful through being lost or misplaced. Now we've covered the categories, we've covered why it's wasteful. Let's cover some of the causes. So the first one I've got up here is poor planning. So failing to measure is a big one. I'm forever harping on this channel about measure. And you need to measure so that you know what level of inventory is good, if at all. And like we've said, we've agreed, you probably need some sort of inventory, but how much do you need? Failure to measure means you're gonna have a poor plan there. A lack of research. Maybe you didn't do any market research and you didn't realize what you would need in terms of raw materials to keep the production going, or you didn't realize how much final product you would need, or you didn't realize, you didn't set up plan the production process good enough. Maybe it was that you didn't know the skills of the various labor that were involved in everything, and so you have these delays and you've got work in progress. All these kinds of things that happen from poor planning. Absence of anticipation. So things happen in the market, changes occur, and if you don't anticipate them, if you don't build those changes into your plan, it's like we always say, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. So whether it's a black swan event or something that happens sporadically, not very often, you need to anticipate these things and build this into your business model and your planning, so you don't have too little inventory, but you also don't have too much. So you may fail to anticipate a great need that the market has, and therefore the demand's going to go way up, or you may fail to anticipate that the market's demands are going down for a particular reason, and maybe you need to pivot to something else. So these are all things, examples of poor planning. I've done videos on the benefits of batching, but you can overbatch, or you can have a lack of haijunka, as it's called, load leveling. So what you should be picking up here is that there's a balance in all forms of planning and management, and certainly as it relates to inventory and the whole concept of waste or Muda. You want to have a balance, and if you have not enough inventory or you have too much, it is very wasteful. The other thing I have here is market changes, and we've already touched on that a little bit, but markets do change. Demand goes up for whatever reason. You know, it may be that there's new knowledge, something was highly publicized. Maybe your business sells some sort of widget that had a pretty stable, pretty steady demand from the market, and then something occurred where everybody was talking about these particular widgets for some reason. It cut the local news, or there was a viral video about the benefits, or something like this. A celebrity brings it up. I'm giving maybe some less pertinent or less likely examples, but all of a sudden market demand increases, and there's a cause of why you may have an inventory challenge. Supply and competition or alternatives. So you may end up with an inventory because there's new entrants into the competitive market, or there's alternatives that come into play that your customers are actually choosing something else instead of your product occasionally. Maybe not every time, but all of a sudden it's leading to you have, again, greater supply than the demand necessitates, and you end up with an inventory. Also, you might have an inventory due to risky predictions, and this is necessary in business sometimes. You need to make predictions based on demand. You need to make predictions based on consumer preferences and trends. And when you guess right, I have a couple of stories that when I was in the automobile business, automotive retail, my business partner and boss at the time was strategized with me, and we chose to take all of the available inventory, remaining inventory, when from Toyota that many of the other dealers didn't want. They were turning it down. They thought the demand wouldn't be there. And we made a risky, it was very expensive decision, and we made a risky decision to bring in all that inventory, and the demand was there, and we sold every last one in a market where there was sufficient demand and there wasn't sufficient supply at any other dealers. We were the ones they had to come to. Also, of course, in fashion, there's trends, and these are sometimes risky decisions you have to make. I think of when I was in the fitness industry, we sort of had this attitude like that we would only sell the very best fitness equipment, and we had really high standards as to what would make it into the store. The management decided that, and what has been common, I guess, all the time are infomercials on fitness products. And at this particular time, there was a lot of infomercials on those ab roller machines. So they were a contraption that sort of had like some support for your head, almost like a pillow, and then they were curved, and you set your elbows on there and you use them to roll. And we thought of these as not being necessary initially and not meeting our standards for what we would have in the store, but so many people were coming in asking for them that we just thought, this is crazy. There's a demand in the market, let's supply the demand. And then we actually took a bunch of inventory. We brought these things in by the truckload, literally 54-foot containers filled with these things, and we stacked them on top of all this other fitness equipment, on top of treadmills, on top of home gyms and everything, and people were just coming in like crazy to get them. And so let's revisit that story at the end of this video when we talk about how inventory can add value. Well, and speaking of which, that's where we are right now. So in that story, the greater availability, the convenience that customers had. They had the choice of picking up and calling the 1-800 number or ordering online and waiting for these ab roller things to come in the mail, or they could, and back then, it wasn't like today with Amazon where it's, you can have same day shipping or next day shipping and that kind of thing. So people would just get in their car, drive across town to our location, and they could try it out and take it home with them at that moment. Now, our pricing was very comparable with what they would have paid online, so it was very convenient for them. Also, the other thing was, when we talk about customer experience, there was no waiting for them, but also selection, because as these things became popular, more and more companies started manufacturing them, and people weren't just coming in and saying, do you have some sort of ab rolling device? They would mention them by name according to the infomercial they watch. So we brought in all of the different kinds. Whatever was the hottest one, we brought those in, and people had selection. And you think, forget about my ab roller anecdote there, and think about when you're choosing where you're going to get your products or services, when you don't have to wait, when the customer experience is great and there's no waiting, that adds to the value. So as you can see here, I'm going to put up the 4 constituents of value as we explore whether inventory actually impacts each of those constituents. So in terms of convenience, if there's greater availability, that's certainly convenient. If you have, so maybe I've been focusing a lot on products, but let's talk about those of you who run service businesses. If you have a little bit of an inventory of labor, that is to say your capacity is greater than the demand at that moment, and so your people are available, ready to go. When you have a demand coming in, that's very convenient for your customer because you can now deliver on the service immediately as opposed to scheduling them further out. And then in terms of selection and one-stop shopping, we all know that there's particular retailers that we go to because you can get just about anything when you go there, and it's like, well, it might not be the very best quality item that I'm going to get, but I want my one-stop shopping. I want to be able to pick everything up, so think of these types of things as it relates to your business. The other constituent, of course, of value is quality, and I think of times where there are material shortages, and you anticipate that, that, so you may choose to inventory those things right away. So you're like anticipating that, well, some of the raw materials that go into your product or service, or maybe even labor, or there may be an inability to get a particular type of equipment or tool that you need. So you bring that in and put it on the proverbial shelf or in the drawer, as I mentioned earlier, or you have some of those resources dormant, but you did it in advance in anticipating that it would add value because you could now give the quality. So maybe there's going to be a shortage of a particular raw material or expert in your field if you deliver a service, and you secure that now, and you sort of have that by definition underutilized or dormant resource that is wasteful in terms of inventory, but it adds value down the road because you guessed right. You knew what was about to happen, and so your quality went up. Commodity price inflation. So that's another one where you can impact quality by and add value rather to your product or service in anticipation of a commodity price inflating, and so you inventory some of those commodities, and you think, well, I can therefore have where some of my competition is going to shortchange their customers by having to take cheaper alternatives to maintain their pricing. I'm going to buy these things in advance because I think a year from now the price of this particular material or labor or whatever it happens to be, this resource necessary for your production system, is going to go up. So you inventory that and you can maintain your pricing. So there's that balance, of course. And then pricing. Of course, sometimes you volume purchase things. If you think of the example of me saying that we brought in a 54-foot container filled with those ab rollers because there was an infomercial demand for it. Well, we bought that many of them all at once so that we could buy them for way cheaper. So we got a volume production, we got a volume discount for bringing those in, that kind of inventory. And the same thing with raw materials. Many of you, if you are prepared to purchase a greater volume further upstream in your production process from your suppliers, from your vendors, they will give you a cheaper price. It just makes sense. And when you do that, you're able to offer better pricing to your customer, therefore you add better value in the market. So sometimes you're making that conscious decision to inventory because it's not as wasteful as it is beneficial to add value. And then also I think of overstock sales. Now, you may say, well, if I didn't manage my inventory correctly and I'm overstocked because there was a reduction in demand or something like that, then isn't that wasteful? Yes, it would be, but it can sometimes add value because you have a sale. You are right away responding. You see, these aren't flying off the shelves as quickly as they once did. Let's sell them at a discount, and that adds value to the marketplace. And even though your profit margins might be reduced and you think, well, it wasn't that valuable of a decision for me, it can pay dividends down the road. First of all, your brand is thought of as always offering good value. So people know that you offer sales and that kind of thing. So this is another great example of where you can add value due to inventory, due to a price advantage. And then the last one I have on the list here is enabling growth or scaling of your business. So I want you to think of inventory in terms of capacity, right? If you have too much inventory that is anticipating a huge demand, and that's very risky, and we run all the risks of deterioration, spoilage, shrinkage, all those types of things where you can end up having inventory that costs you and it ties up a lot of resources and you're not leveraging them. But we've given examples in the past where I use a fitness analogy of those people who are trying to gain muscle mass and they say, well, I need to have an excess of calories. Well, you don't want to stuff your face full of any food whatsoever. And even if it's high quality protein or whatever nutrient you need, if you have too much of it, you'll just end up gaining fat. It won't work. So what we advise in a nutritional context for fitness is that you want to be slightly in excess in terms of nutrient availability for your body to put on that muscle. So you're going to have a little bit more, but you're also, the demand from your body is going to increase at the same time. And think of that in your business as it relates to being able to scale and grow. You don't want to invest all your resources into inventories in anticipation of, well, I have greater capacity, therefore I'm going to have greater convenience, I'm going to buy at a lower price, I'm going to have all this great value. That is very risky, but it does work to have excess supply. Remember our axiom we've talked about many times, that any time where demand exceeds your capacity, you are going to lose sales. You're going to also lose some market share as a result of that. So you should always have a little bit of extra inventory that allows you, if the demand is there, to expand your capacity, and then you reinvest the proceeds, those revenues and profits that you gained from that extra capacity that gave you that edge. You can reinvest that and grow slowly and scale your business that way. That's the best idea. We have a whole video on that, and inventory can be useful and add value in terms of internally for you and your business. There was an example I heard recently, perhaps you're aware that there's been a microchip shortage worldwide, and there is Taiwan Semiconductor is one of just a handful, maybe only 3 or 4 huge foundries that make these these chips that are necessary for all electronics these days. And the automotive industry was really caught with, they were caught without having enough supply. In other words, because of the implementation of just-in-time inventory, which Toyota popularized, and it's one of the things that, you know, this whole concept of understanding that it's a form of Muda, too much inventory can be wasteful. Many businesses emulate that, like you may be trying to do right now by watching this video. You want to emulate it, but Toyota also understands that concept of balance, and sometimes how something that in one context can be wasteful, such as inventory, it can also add value, and you want to make sure that you hedge against and you mitigate against those possible catastrophic events that can happen. So Toyota was one of the only OEMs, automotive manufacturers, who was not caught in a real bind due to the chip shortage, because they had stockpiled some, they had inventoried some, while others were content to have just-in-time inventory. Good management is about that balance and making sure that you use this concept of Muda and this concept of not allowing for waste to underutilize your resources, and not allow waste to be so wasteful to underutilize your resources, and instead apply some balance. And that's exactly what Toyota did. It's not that they don't believe, as they once did, in just-in-time inventory, but they also understand there's a balance necessary. So bear that in mind when you're applying these concepts to your business. I recommend that you go through this and go back over this from time to time. Look at your notes. Remember, I've asked you to frame this through the context of your business. And I think a lot of you, when I go through this, really, maybe in my examples, I focus too much on those of you who sell physical products as opposed to those of you who are in a service business, the provision of a service. But it applies in both ways. That's where you go back to the definition and just repeatedly from time to time, maybe every quarter, you look at this, rewatch the video, send this out to your management team, share the video with people in your organization so that you can create this culture, and brainstorm. Maybe, you know, have some fun with it. Give a prize for the person who comes up with the best idea for the elimination of waste in these various ways, and that works for your business, because I can't tell you what's the best way for you to manage your business without having the specialized knowledge that you have. But I can tell you this general concept of eliminating waste and reducing it to the greatest extent possible is very valuable. And remember, when you're doing this and your competition is not, you are going to beat the competition. I'm going to harp on that and remind you of this, because the opposite is true as well. You can't afford for your competition to be applying these effective management skills and you're being less streamlined, less lean in your management skills, less efficient, and you're failing to innovate and drive value in whatever way possible, which is what you want to do at all times. Use your specialized knowledge within your organization and have that culture where everybody understands we always want to improve. Perpetual refinement to drive your business forward. All right, that's where I want to leave it today. I hope you got something out of this. If you did, or if you didn't, whether you want to push back, you want to agree, you want to leave some examples. When people read those examples, everybody gets to learn, and we need to learn from one another. Perpetual refinement.